Welcome to everyone who is here today. Great to see everyone again. If we can start with karakia. Thank you, Phil. Oh, okata.
Morena koutou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makinukina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, ehi aki ana te atukura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, ti he mauri ora.
Thank you, Phil. All right. So we've had our agenda pack for quite some time. So what I'll do is we will kick straight into it. Just before we start, though, I understand that the ICM workshop has been postponed, so that won't be happening. So we will do this one, then the remit lunch, and then straight into the final workshop after that. All right, over to you, Julie.
Just
Brian?
Chair, just by way of introduction. So today we've got Julie Hanson, the Senior Policy Advisor in my team, who will take you through the ZEB part of the workshop, and also James Llewellyn, who is a contractor with expertise in the bus and infrastructure technology. So I'll hand over to Julie to take you through the workshop.
To everybody, and I see that Trudy and Vince have joined us, so they're our experts in contracts and the commercial side of public transport and the operations, so they'll be here to advise you on any questions that you might have if they arise over the course of the workshop. So maybe I'll just crack right into it. Really what we need today is a position on council's control over assets for the delivery of zero emissions buses across the region. Partly because it's an election year and it's very hard to get meetings and workshops with you from now until then, but also we have contracts that need renewing. The work is starting on that now. We need to know what is going to go in those contracts with the bus operators, whether they are doing everything and providing all the infrastructure and the depots, or we are, or there's some sort of hybrid. So that's up to, it's not a decision that you're coming to today, it's to help us craft the actual roadmap that's going to come back to you for endorsement and approval at the August meeting. But we do need to have some very clear direction on what needs to go in those contracts. So you can't leave the room until you've told us that. So Brian has introduced us, and I've got James here, our technical advisor, which I'm very pleased about because he's very knowledgeable about zero emissions buses. My role in this has been to pull all the information together and take you through the process so that you feel comfortable that you are moving in the right direction for our region.
Julie, just
yes.
Before we start, would you prefer that we carry on through the introduction, then come to questions?
Yeah, I think so. The first part of the
Waikato times, I believe. Julie?
Sorry, the first part of the workshop is just going to recap the things that we talked about at the workshop that we had first time round in November. So I can skim through that, but it's everything is in the discussion document. So if you've read that, you'll know what it's about and why we must comply and transition to zero emissions buses. But I'm happy to skim through or just take questions. Shall I just go for it and go slide by slide?
A quick question.
Ben.
Yeah, so if we look at page 34, there were three options, option A, B, and C. Is that ultimately what you're asking us to determine today? Full fleet transition, staged introduction, or delayed introduction of zero emission buses, option C?
Partly.
Okay.
So there's the control over the depots and the charging infrastructure. So that's one direction that we need from you. And the next one is how quickly we transition.
And sorry, and the control over the buses and the depots, does that include the financial cost to them? Because they don't seem to be here in the document. They're not in the analysis doesn't include the cost of buying the depots and.
It should do on page.
Councillor, I just wonder if maybe we could work through the workshop pack and I'm sure those things will become clear, and if they're not, then maybe some questions at the appropriate time. Councillor Nicol.
Thanks, I'll keep it brief. I really appreciate the work. It's a good document. It's just, I hope we can get you to the place of all the information that you're seeking, because to me it feels like we might not have everything we need. Like some of this might not be developed far enough for us to be able to make a really good decision. But at the same time, let's see at the end of the workshop whether we have managed.
Yes.
Thanks.
I think it's
just cautious about big decisions and a lot of hypotheticals.
I absolutely agree with that, and I do think that should you have a direction to or a position that's in principle you want to control the assets, then we would have to come back with far more detailed information in the business case, and it would need to go through the LTP and all of those sorts of things. So it's kind of just getting to that.
Try our best, eh?
We'll do our best. Yeah. I realise it's a lot of money. Okay.
And what I meant with that, there's a lot of other options that could be explored alongside that to move around.
Yes. Next slide, please, Brooke. So today I just want to quickly recap on workshop 1, and then in part 2 we'll talk about the technical information assessment. Next slide, please. Oh, and then the next one. So as a quick reminder, what's driving the transition is that we have a mandate from the government that says there to be no new diesel buses from 1st of July this year. That's to be imported or registered in New Zealand. But the existing diesel buses in the national fleet can be moved around. So that gives us a little bit of leeway. There's a target of 0 emissions by 2035, but that's a target only. As I mentioned, we've got new bus contracts coming up between 2028 and 2031. So in those contracts, there needs to be clear direction for us and for contractors about what's provided by who, where does that responsibility lie? And as you know, you've already got your own climate change commitments within the regional council.
Just one quick question, please. Does that mandate apply to the education board?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, just noticed that remit.
Yes. In fact, a lot of former public transport buses get moved over to be Ministry of Education buses. Yeah. Next slide, please. A quick reminder, the green is the ZEB roadmap. That's what we're working on now. That's where it fits in the whole bus contracts renewal program. And everything within that program, there's all these different projects going on, and they're all going to feed into the contracts and then inform the regional public transport plan, which we'll be working on next year. Next slide, please. So at the last workshop, you agreed on a series of objectives, that you'd comply with the mandate, that you want a ZEB system that allows delivery of the services that are planned, you want increased customer satisfaction and use of public transport, you want to reduce public transport emissions, and you want free and fair competition in contracts and tendering. Next slide, please. And the principles around decision making for, in the future, you need to meet the statutory and regulatory requirements. You want to support your existing council strategic intent and policies. You want a fit for purpose ZEB transition that's appropriate for our whole region. Contractual arrangements assign costs and risks appropriately. You want to work collaboratively with relevant stakeholders, and you want to leverage funding opportunities and partnerships. Next slide, please. So after the last workshop, or at the last workshop, you asked us to investigate all options for depot and charging infrastructure control. You didn't want to discount anything at that stage. You wanted to take a middle ground approach for transition timeline and cost. You wanted to focus on reducing public transport emissions rather than the corporate emissions. You might remember the graph that showed as a proportion of corporate emissions, public transport was huge, but overall, it's relatively minor in the whole scheme of things across all transport in the region. And you wanted us to consider a range of scenarios to suit different locations and not have a one-size-fits-all approach. Next slide, please. So a note on funding. I don't know if you read the most recent central government budget closely, but you may have noticed that the public transport bus decarbonisation initiative has now got $0 in it. Yeah, and I've confirmed with NZTA that whatever was left over has already been committed. So effectively, the fund is closed. So that was a dedicated initiative and funding. It doesn't mean that there isn't funding through our normal channels through the RLTP, but we would just, have to put forward a good case for that once we develop that plan. So I think it's kind of important to note that we've got a mandate, but there's no funding. How are we going to do this in the best way that suits our region? Okay. Next slide, please. Any questions so far? It's a pretty quick recap.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I am going to pop up with a question. Since we had that first workshop, I've been noting some of the concerns around electrical and electricity generation around the world. And if you recall, a few months ago, Portugal had a complete power outage, and it was suspected that it was through solar energy that caused, and the pulses were from that solar energy. And I am reliably informed that the New Zealand Police have been working on their plans should a situation actually develop. The Portugal situation turned out not to be solar, but it's raised questions around the world by governments as to what happens when in the next 10 years when solar pulses are expected to be at their highest for some years. They are expected to affect electricity generation. So that brings in wider questions, and I know I'm right off the planet here on this, but the reality is, no pun intended, but the reality is putting all our eggs in one basket, that is electricity, driving buses, it just doesn't seem sensible. And I know for myself, I use both petrol and diesel and other alternatives on the farm, so that if should one go, I can always use the other. And it just doesn't make sense that we're putting all our eggs in one basket. And I know we're going to solar generation, wind farms, solar power farms proliferating in the Waikato. The reality is, if the grid goes, public transport stops from 2027. So is it sensible? And I just want to throw that in the mix today. Whilst we cannot break the law and not comply with the mandate as a council, it just doesn't seem sensible to throw all the eggs in one basket. So I don't know whether that's a question or not, but I think there's something in there.
Thanks for your comment.
Yeah,
Councillor Smith.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that I can answer that. It's probably a bigger question than me.
Should we not be asking our staff to be going back to government and asking what is the plan B? Thank you.
That makes good sense.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Morena koutou. So I guess my first question is about the mandate. Is it a local or central mandate? If it's central and there's no budget in the Crown's budget for 2025, where does the mandate sit legally? Because if you're saying that we've been mandated that we have to do zero emission on buses, and you expect the ratepayers to be paying for that instead of the Crown, how do we justify this? How is that justified? Because we fight around the table about how much money we spend that belongs to the ratepayers. And then you come to the table and you tell us that, well, you didn't, but you know, that there's no budget from the Crown to do this, but we're mandated to do that. Where are we legally sitting to say, we can't afford this? So, you know, I'd like to understand that bit before I look at the rest of it.
Yeah, thanks for your comment, councillor. It is a real unusual situation in that it is a central government mandate. I'm not sure where we would stand legally if we chose to ignore it, but we would need to get some legal advice on that, which we're happy to do. Aren't we, Phil? Yeah, it's like secondary regulation. It's not in the legislation, but it's in the regulations that sit under that. Yeah, so it is a legal requirement. I guess what we're here to do today is that in the face of that mandate, with very little funding or no funding available, which means it falls mostly to the ratepayers, we need to just find the best way forward. It's an anomaly for sure. Yeah, James.
Yeah, through the chair, I think it is worth emphasising that the way that any future zero emission bus system will be funded will be through a contract between Waikato Regional Council as the public transport authority and a private operator. And both NZTA through the National Land Transport Fund and Waikato Regional Council through rating will make, contributions to the costs of that contract. The key challenge will be when we come to let that contract and we specify in it the need for new, possibly second-hand, but almost certainly new zero-emission buses, the operators will come back with a price, and that price may or may not fit with the budget that we will have available. And at that point, we'll have a choice, and NZTA and indeed the government will have a choice as to whether the gap is funded or whether there is another strategy, such as a longer contract, which might make costs cheaper over time. Or another option, of course, unfortunately, would be to look at changes to services to fit within the existing budget. Fundamentally, we are tied by the budgets that we set both locally through the rates and nationally through the National Land Transport Fund. So there are a variety of permutations that are available. All we can do is, in good faith, go through the process of putting out contracts for what we would ideally like. But in those contracts, we'll have contingency arrangements about what happens if we're not able to afford a certain scenario. There may be other options we can look at.
Tata, just use your mic, please.
That means that the user ends up paying. And right now we've been advertising how important it is to use local transport. And then with this coming up and bus fares increasing, you're not going to get the patronism to help the contractor to fulfill his obligation, because at the end of the day, if the Crown's not paying, we can't afford it. There's no one else to pay but the user. And the user's going to say, I'm not paying that much for a bus, I may as well take my car. So, you're in a dilemma. So it sucks to be you more than it does for us. So I really would like to understand how we're going to get over this going into the future, because the LTP is done. There's nothing in there for you guys. Anyway, good luck.
I think through the chair, I can't really add a huge amount more to that, other than that it is government policy currently that the passenger pays a greater share of the operating costs compared to ratepayers and the National Land Transport Fund. That's something that, as you know, we're working through as a council, as indeed all councils are across New Zealand. And it's probably worth making the point, actually, that we're not the only council in this situation. Every other council who is letting bus contracts over the next 3 or 4 years, and there are quite a few of them, be having the same conversations with NZTA. And there is strength in numbers. So, behind the scenes, regional councils meet regularly through the Transport Special Interest Group and are having discussions about how we collectively manage this process. So if there is a light at the end of the tunnel, it's that we're not alone, and we have good access to support through our colleagues across other regional councils to try and work through this with NZTA.
Thank you. Councillor Maher.
Thank you. My question is probably the same. I have the same concerns as Noel raised earlier, but I'm just hoping that we're doing our due diligence around other options too. I see Auckland Transport in 2021 had a 2-year trial with hydrogen, the hydrogen bus, and that sort of thing. Again, we seem to have all our eggs, as Noel indicated, in one basket with electricity, but are we looking into the other options that are available?
Chair, yes, we are. We are certainly looking at whether battery electric bus is the preferred option. At the moment, across both New Zealand and indeed the world, battery electric is the established technology compared to hydrogen, which is relatively new in its infancy in terms of its ability to power buses and to enable the kinds of emission savings that battery electric would. Now, hydrogen is in its infancy. That's the challenge we've got. So whilst we're looking at it as an option, and hydrogen has good application when you've got very long routes, when you need a lot more range compared to a battery electric bus, hydrogen is very expensive. And the level of energy you get out of hydrogen compared to the amount it takes to produce it is still quite inefficient. So look, there are pros and cons of every technology. I think that's the reality of the situation. And yes, we are doing our due diligence to understand the pros and cons and where we'll ultimately end up. There is the possibility that we may look at a hydrogen trial in the future, but that's something that we'd have to discuss and obviously discuss how that's funded, whether that's through a contract or a trial or whatever. So we're still looking at the options, but at the moment, someone needs to convince us that there is a better and safer and more reliable alternative than battery electric.
Yeah, have you seen the results of that trial? Because it was only a 2-year trial, so I'm picking it finished in 2023. And I'd hate us to sort of redo a trial that someone else has already done.
Yes, the trial, as I understand it, is still going on. They had a lot of problems refueling the bus to start with, so it spent about the first 6 months off the road because there was a refueling site in the ports of Auckland where they had to take it every day to refuel it. And my understanding now is they got over that problem and the trial is still ongoing. My understanding is that the bus is reliable. People like it. The key question is, can you scale it up to do a whole contract? And that's the bit that I think we're still waiting to find out. But AT are always very good at providing information about what they're doing and how it's worked. So their own roadmap is really good. And their own roadmap was based on a lot of trials of different types of zero emission buses in different circumstances. So hilly routes, longer routes, more congested routes, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we've got a lot of good information.
Might just add to that we meet with Auckland Transport fairly frequently, and we met with them yesterday, funnily enough, and we're talking about their procurement of the next batch of units under 5 contracting tranches. And we were reflecting on the most recent contracts that they have let down in the south of the super city, and there are 44 electric double deckers that have come in as part of that. They are transitioning out diesels through the first few years of that contract, but it will become full electric over a period of time. So the market has either not identified hydrogen vehicles for that contract, or the suppliers have only suggested electric. But they've gone with 44 of the buses that we're running on the Cambridge and Te Awamutu route effectively for that. So every time that topic comes up, the market will be tested by them, but at the moment they're not bringing in any more hydrogen vehicles.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
Thanks. Yeah, I get change is scary, but we currently have all our eggs in one basket too. But I do really appreciate the critical thinking going into resilience. I think that's a really good thing to do. It's a real shame we don't have a national energy strategy that thinks about these things to give us guidance, but thankfully we'll have a regional one that might be able to turn its mind to it. The cost of the status quo is in the paper, it's going to rise substantially. So whether there's a mandate or not, it makes sense for us to look at this, and we are certainly not the first city or region in the world to be doing so. Capital cost, from what I can see in the paper, is the real challenge, and I'm really keen to get into the part of the workshop where we look at the different options around that. So I won't stay on the tangent for too long.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I've got Councillor Clarkson and Councillor Cookson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like some clarity around timelines though, because my recollection of the original statement relating to this zero emissions buses occurred in 2021 out of the Beehive, and 4 years funding was allocated. It was only ever 4 years funding. But the target date was 2035. So can somebody clarify that? Because the principle that we've outlined of the middle ground can be achieved. You don't have to turn all buses into the system if the original timeline is being followed, as was announced by the parliamentary paper in 2021.
So the
Julie.
mandate is that there are no new diesel buses to come in to New Zealand from the 1st of July this year, with the overall target of the whole public transport fleet being zero emissions by 2035. That's right. Yes.
So that means you can have a fleet which has some mixture in it.
Yes, you can.
And this is the point that I wanted to make, because today we're rushing into sort of talking about it as if it has to be done on mandate and happen immediately. But actually the middle ground is achievable.
Yes.
And I'm promoting the idea of the middle ground because, in the same way that Councillor Smith said, you don't want all your eggs in one basket. But there needs to be a planned transition. And I thought that's what we were going to be talking about today.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that that's in the options coming up. But we've got 3 more questions. So I would like to move on to the guts of the workshop. So I've got Councillor Cookson, then Hughes, then Dunbar Smith.
I'll leave mine to later because pretty much that conversation's been similar to.
Thank you.
I'm happy to wait until later on.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've referred to other regional councils. Can you indicate where they're at, and are any of them choosing not to follow the mandate?
So through the chair, yeah, I work with a few different public transport authorities, and the most recent one is Gisborne District Council, who have a very small fleet, about 11 vehicles in total. So in Gisborne, because the contract is let from the 1st of July this year, I should say, the mandate would kick in, and Gisborne, for primarily financial reasons, have decided to go with a second-hand fleet of diesel buses, because the electric option was unaffordable for that particular authority. And any authority can do that if they can find second-hand diesel buses. The challenge comes when you have bigger councils and bigger fleets. The number of diesel buses is only going to go down, and sooner or later they're going to become harder and harder to source. So other councils that I'm aware of are looking at both options. Can they do an all second-hand diesel option? Can they do an all electric option, or some hybrid of the two? And that's pretty much what we're going to be discussing later on, is what is the strategy around phasing in, because everyone I think agrees that simply there is no money to suddenly introduce 4,000 new electric buses into the whole of New Zealand. It just doesn't add up from a public purse perspective. So we're all grappling with the same issues and trying to look at how we can stay within the mandate, but also move things forward.
Yes, and we're coming to that shortly, but obviously the capex of 282 million, whether you do the phase in or whether you do full, is still a big cost straight up front.
Yeah, that's right. And when we get into the discussions later, one of the challenges around any public transport authority owning assets is they would have to pay that money up front. If an operator pays it, you pay it through the life of the contract. So it's not an upfront charge. You pay it over 9 years, much as you'd pay, a car over 3 years if you bought it on hire purchase. So it's that kind of dilemma and discussion we'll get into a bit later.
I just really need to ask on that one because it confused me in the paper. But when we purchase assets or do a whole lot of work in ICM on flood protection infrastructure, we don't pay the capital up front. We borrow through our funding mechanisms. So, like you're saying, we'd have to pay it up front. We'd find our way of spreading that cost over the lifetime, just like we would through contract, right?
Yeah, through the chair, that's exactly right. So
Just checking.
one of the challenges you have is if you're going for a third party to purchase the assets, would they be able to get as good a finance terms as
That's right.
as regional council
They often can.
would, which they
Yeah.
often can't. It all depends. So these are the kinds of discussions you need to have. But ultimately, I guess the challenge you have with any public transport authority owning assets is there's a big number
Yeah.
in your long-term plan which says, this is a commitment that we need to make, and it might be better value for money over 10, 15, 20 or 30 years. But not everyone will see it like that. So it's about how we try and make sure we understand what the real costs are for different options.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, let's move on.
So this is the part of the workshop that we're looking for some confirmed direction on. So while the transition to ZEB is mandatory, developing the ZEB roadmap, which is where all this discussion is leading us to, gives us some ability to decide how the mandate is implemented and the pace at which we might complete the transition. Next slide, please. So we commissioned a consultancy company to provide us with some technical information and some modelling that would help us to, put that before you in relation to the number of buses we might need based on what we would need for the next round of contracts going through into the future, right out to 2038. We asked them to look at where are the optimal locations for depots, because there's a whole lot of considerations around that. Power requirements and grid connections. Not every place might be suitable to serve the bus network, but might not have enough power close by and might require upgrades. What are the costs and what are the implications for the emissions across the region? Next slide, please. So we looked at what the number of buses needed. What have we got now? About 109. Yes, there it is. So the 2028 scenario based on the predicted or anticipated increase of numbers needed for improving services, if that's the way we're going, is to get to 126 buses, and then over the next 13 years to increase that by those additional amounts. Next slide, please. So in Hamilton, that's an extract out of the Hamilton City District Plan. Indicative locations, only because they're the ones that have got the appropriate zoning that would make the ease of consenting process a bit easier, that are in the right place for serving the network now and into the future, and that they're located close enough to where power location is. The regional depots are often in a local freight firm yard overnight. They're not necessarily, with the exception of the Huntly depot. So they're often just one or two buses, a much smaller scenario, I guess. I guess the main, talking about resilience, well, actually, typically the land area for a ZEB depot is about 20% bigger than for the equivalent number of diesel buses. This because that allows for safety and those sorts of things that you need to take into account. And their charging infrastructure is sort of bigger than diesel tanks. It's suggested that we have at least 2 depots within Hamilton City to provide that level of resilience, like on each side of the river. Especially in the event of power outages or detours where the buses might use up more charge going a longer route temporarily. So we've got some figures on the purchase of land in new greenfield areas. It's around $400 to $500 a square metre. So if you need a minimum of about 2 hectares, that sort of puts you up around $10 million just for the land purchase. And you may or may not decide to do that. But leasing it is at about $25 per square metre. So on a yearly basis, that's about $500,000. So initial investigations are that the Te Rapa North area has a substation nearby, which is easier to then accommodate charging infrastructure.
As 109 or 128 buses, are we expecting them to have fixed batteries, and we're looking to have 60 odd or 70 odd charging units in each of the 2 situations, or are we going to be having swap out batteries? Because this comes into the scenario. Are you going to cover that later, or because there's some real big numbers here
Yes.
you're talking, and if you don't have those options of swap out, that's a massive infrastructure cost to have 70 or 80 charging stations in one place, plus the buses.
I'll let James handle that.
So through the chair, the bus batteries are fixed, and they tend to last between 8 and 9 years before they need to be replaced. So what happens generally in depots is that you have one pedestal for the charger and up to 3 guns. So you can have effectively 3 buses charging at one station. So that's how you need less numbers of chargers compared to the buses, because one pedestal can do 3. That's the way it works. Another option is to have a pantograph over the top of the bus. It comes down and lays on the roof. The advantage of that is that it saves space, because you don't have to have the pedestal and all the equipment, and it's actually in some respects safer because you're not tripping over cables and things like that. So there's various ways you can configure the depot efficiently, and the key issue as well is how long it takes to charge a bus, because that bus, when it's sitting there being charged, A, isn't out in service, and B, is taking up space. So there needs to be consideration about size of battery, power of charger, whether it's AC or DC, all these kinds of things where we're looking at the technical implementation plan that we've commissioned is effectively giving us the best information that we can to come up with a robust technical approach that's good value for money.
Then if you've got 128 buses or thereabouts in about 3 or 4 years or whatever it was, you've got to have redundancy, because not every bus is going to be in service, or something could be getting maintained or whatever. So that's a lot more buses. So we need to cut to the chase a bit here as to, do we own the stuff and lease it out as part of the contract, or whether we own it, or whether we put it in the contract. If we don't own it, the reality is that we're in the hands of the contractor and subsequent contracts. So I think we need to really cut to the chase a bit here.
Yeah, and that was our concern when we did the RPTP last time round, is that if we give it all to an operator, that gives them the monopoly moving forward as well. So that's why owning or leasing the depot land has become part of the discussion. So
That's the discussion today. We've got some data to share with you from the work that we've been doing since the last workshop. The one thing I was just going to add is we've got experience in 2 ways here. One is that we've spent the last 6 months visiting depots as part of our normal business, and looking at the way that other operators are setting these up. And sometimes the buses reverse into a fixed point, and then other locations I've seen, they're running them in lines that are often 3 buses deep, running off a line of chargers, so the vehicles can keep moving rather than being stuck in a corner. There's the example that we have led as an organisation is that we've built 2 depots, one in Te Awamutu, Waikiki, and one in Leamington in Cambridge, and they have 1 charger each, and they operate about 5 buses from each location. So that is the way that they have been structured. That's, in both cases, that land is owned by Waipa District Council, which we are leasing, and then we have built a charger and a yard, and then we lease that to the operator. So those are 2 depots that have been built over the last year here with SURF money. Those have got 2, but they're charging 5 buses through the day and overnight, and they're keeping a fleet of 5 going with 1 charger, just as an example.
Yeah, thank you.
Understand.
Councillor Nicholl.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I just want to be assured that what we're looking at here fits in with our broader ideas and goals of the RPTP, which I'm sure you think it does, but I haven't seen much mentioned in the paper around options that are slightly outside of Hamilton further. Perhaps that's just because of zoning issues, but obviously the land would cost less. The options on the way that the site could be set up. So I have seen some where it's like a 2-story bus depot, so you'd need less land, again, lower cost, bigger on the infrastructure, obviously. Not a lot of discussion yet on the leasing land options, and in particular, I think Noel mentioned before about, Tainui Group Holdings would be an obvious partner. I'm looking at Vorakura over there, but and then there were some thoughts that came to mind as I was reading the paper, like we obviously do want to have park and rides in the future, and I'm thinking if the buses were to be there, not to be on the site mainly during the day because they're out and about, but that's the time of day when cars would need a space. Is there a way that that can be combined? I suppose that's one direct question. And then the last one would be, if you have got a whole lot of land and it's concreted, the obvious question is to whether you generate power on that land as well. And obviously there's a whole lot of pictures online about how there's bus depots with solar panels on top, so that you've got a revenue stream coming either from the park and ride or from the generation of power. That would also then totally change your financial side of things. And I'm just going to throw it in as a final point, that it really concerns me that we don't get the information in a timely manner from the lines companies about what is and isn't possible. It's not the first time I've heard this. And I hope that it's something that can get resolved, because this is going to be an issue with every electrification question for every industrial site in Hamilton and beyond. Yeah. So I'm wishing you luck with getting the info that you need there. But yeah, 2 questions. One is the feasibility of park and ride, and one's the feasibility of power generation.
So through the chair, I can have a go at answering those. The challenge you have with park and ride is that it's generally deemed not desirable for public to have access to operational areas, particularly with high voltage equipment. So I would imagine that if an operator owned and operated the depot, they would be dead against that. If a public transport authority owned and operated the depot, then I guess that's a choice, but there's risks to manage.
Probably a design challenge more than anything.
It could be design challenge, and you do still have buses having to come in and out during the day sometimes as well. So it's an interesting one, but it will be a challenge.
Okay.
The second one, I think, is certainly something that, with the costs of these depots, particularly in city centre areas, being able to maximise the revenue from other sources other than buses is particularly important. So when I went to China at the end of last year, on a zero emission bus tour. It wasn't a holiday. It was very much a case of during the day, they had contracts with the local municipal rubbish collectors to recharge their vehicles whilst the buses were out. So the chargers weren't sitting there idle. There were 45 or 50 dust carts charging away, and then when the buses came back, they left, and it was all, as you would expect in China, very well organised and thought through. So again, whether it's a PTA owning the depot and operating it or a third party, there are opportunities for that kind of approach, and energy generation is another one. There is space. You can put solar panels. There could be spare energy that way. There's all kinds of things that could be looked at. I guess the key question we've got to ask ourselves in this workshop is, well, firstly, as a PTA, what's our role in asset ownership and control? And then, irrespective of what the answer is, how do we want to structure a contract that gives those opportunities airtime, I guess you'd say, to become things we will actually want to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kneebone.
Oh,
And then we'll move on.
yeah, it was going to be a park and ride question. And my concern was if any decisions we're making at the moment and to compromise any decisions that I think we the Royal need to make with regards to park and rides going forward. But from what I'm hearing, you're just saying it's unlikely that.
Thank you. Yep, moving on. Julie.
Next slide, please, Brooke. So thank you. Through your chair, in response to Councillor Nichols' question about comment about power companies, it has been difficult for our consultants to retrieve information from them. So, but we do know that in Hamilton, with that number of buses, upgrades would be required, and there's a cost to that. In some parts of the region, they just we couldn't get confirmation one way or the other whether there would be sufficient capacity in the power network. South Waikato, Te Kuiti, Thames Coromandel, with the number of buses that would be required to provide the services, at this stage, there's unlikely to be an upgrade required to the power supply. But there are big differences between needing to upgrade a substation versus a transformer. Transformer minimum of about 850,000. Substations are probably substantially more, have a very long lead in time, and that would require a lot of working with the power companies to achieve that. I guess the contractual arrangements would be around whether, because WRC needs the upgrade to provide the bus service, whether we pay upfront for that upgrade or it's worked out through the contracts, much like the provision of the buses, and the power company takes that cost on. We pay for it over the life of our contract to supply power. Requires a lot of collaboration.
I just want to throw in a comment that I've heard from a lot of say sustainability managers, climate managers, that type of thing around in Hamilton, that this is an issue for them as well. So I really wonder what the opportunities are to upgrade transformers or substations together in partnership with others. Because it's a real constraint, and with a lot of them are running on gas at the moment. And just remembering that Rita report for the Waikato, there was quite a substantial change in when industrial sites would want to transition off gas. I think the number was 2027, the year was 2027, and it is looking to track that way, just on cost. So their return on investment might make sense at the similar time where we're looking at contracts. I just hope that we could explore who is nearby and who is looking at these things, because they are a bit stumped at times. So yeah, partnership might be the way to go.
Thank you. Might suggest that we hold questions and we motor through
Sure.
to where we really need that direction.
Thank you. Yeah, next slide, please. So our consultants came up with 4 scenarios on pages 16 and 17, or from pages 16 and 17. There's a big table there with the different costs associated with each scenario. So we've got the current diesel situation, we've got the future diesel, we've got ZEB all at 28 or at the commencement of new contracts, and then the phased approach over several years. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, James.
Sorry, through the chair, just very briefly, I think it's very important we understand that word scenario. So that's not to say we want to do this, but when we were asking the consultants to provide advice, we needed to give them some scenarios to say, if we had this number of buses or this area of land or whatever, you know, what would it look like? What would it cost? So just need to be really clear what we mean by scenarios. Sorry, I'll just make that. Because it often crops up and people think we're talking about we're going to do this.
Yeah.
So just be very clear. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So we do have, you know, massive spreadsheets full of numbers and millions of dollars and all of that. So if you really want to look at them, that's fine. We've tried to make the best sense of those numbers to give you some really high level analysis of what the costs involve. So in the table in the document, you know, say for current total capex is $45 million if we to just roll over the contracts as they are now. There's all different scenarios there, as James mentioned. In general, the analysis shows that the diesel scenario currently has the lowest overall costs for both CapEx and OpEx, but that is not something that we can do because of the mandate. The diesel future scenario, which uses the number of buses that we'd like to use as we progress over the next, 13 years, whatever our aspirations are, has the highest costs across all factors. So apart from not being a goer in terms of the mandate, it's also the most expensive route to go down. And the figures that have been provided in the modelling are really just to provide a comparison or a baseline, for us to compare the other scenarios to. So we know that either of the diesel options or scenarios would not meet the mandate. Next slide, please, Brooke. So the modelling shows that there's little difference between the upfront capital costs, if you want to call them upfront, or if they're built into the cost of the contract for either of the ZEB options. The major expense in the transition is in the first few years, where there are the one-off costs for development of depots and charging infrastructure. Once that's sort of out of the way or built into the contracts, then the operational costs become much lower. They reduce, as well as the emissions go right down as well. So both of those ZEB scenarios offer lower operational costs and lower emissions over the different time periods. So the high costs that we talk about upfront is really just somebody is paying the bills for those. You've just got to find the right arrangement between the different parties as to who's paying it upfront, what impact that's going to have if you say, no, it's going to be spread over the cost of the contract. Are we paying more because we've got the, spread out, just like, interest on a car loan? The longer you take to pay it, the higher the total cost that you pay. Yeah, I think
There's an option in the paper.
definitely. Just checking my notes so I haven't missed anything out. So another thing that we can think about, and this may impact on your considerations, is that if you leave things to the operator, you kind of lose a bit of strategic advantage in saying where your depots are going to be, and for maybe not for these contracts, but for your future contracts, who's going to have access to that land to charge the buses for your service. But you can write into your contracts clauses that require the return of the assets to WRC, but that comes at a premium too. Phil?
And just on that point, that's not uncommon, that the operator builds and then there's a transfer clause either to the next operator, and the builder continues to own but has to offer it to the next operator, or some form of purchase that would bring it into council ownership at that point. So we've been talking to other regions, and in some cases that's commonly used, and in other cases it's not used at all, but it's an option there for us.
These graphs are on page 21 of the report if you want to take a closer look. But I guess what they illustrate is that the spikes in the costs are in those first few years of the implementation of the new bus contracts where we're introducing ZEB. After that, costs just reduce, right back. They become relatively consistent over the remaining life of the contract. It also shows the reduction of emissions and the cost of the emissions over time, reducing at 2028 when new contracts are implemented, should you choose ZEB, and then again at 2032, and then to drop right down. It's the yellow line that you can't really see, but it's right down at zero, thereby meeting the government's target of zero emissions by 2035.
I've got a question relating to this.
Yeah.
So we're looking at $140 million, including land, in 2028. Is that correct?
I think that covers the costs of the buses too. Is that right?
Total capex, including land and.
Yeah, so capex is any asset you buy, so that's depot and
Buses, yeah.
Right. So that would obviously have a significant impact on rates in that 2028 year.
Well, through the chair, that's back to the discussion earlier about how do you fund and finance something. So do you pay everything up front, or do you borrow money and pay over a long period of time? So that's the key issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you provide scenarios on that for August or not?
As in the final approval of the roadmap, what you mean, come to the August meeting?
Well, it would be useful to know how you'd pay it and what impact, because there's nothing in the long-term plan at the moment.
No.
So this is, you're trying to preempt the long-term plan. So, yeah.
Sure.
Well, thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I've sat quietly here brewing away on all these things. And I thought I'll probably take a more simplistic approach to it, because somebody's got to pay. And we've been given a government mandate which says that in 26, 27, we've got to move to 34 to 40% funded by the user. I would be, and you may have these, you tell me you've got some big spreadsheets, and I would certainly like to see the information of them. But some of the statements that have been made is that diesel currently is the lowest OPEX, diesel future is the largest OPEX, and I want to understand why that change, because the only difference is you're going to buy new diesel buses that I can see, and I can't understand why the operating expenses are going to be that much higher. Then you say all ZEB, all costs, ZEB is the lowest cost operation, which makes sense from an operating cost, but you must factor in all the costs associated with that. And I assume that's done in those models. That's why I'd like to see them, because all the land costs, all the funding costs, everything else must be factored in so that we know what the operating costs are going to be on a per kilometre basis, on a like-by-like basis. Then I would like to see what that translates to in terms of a fare paying passenger meeting the government's guidelines of 34 to 40%. Then we need to go and talk to the customer. Are they prepared to pay this? Because I'm not happy to commit to 211 electric buses if they're going to cost the users $20 to move 10 kilometres down the road. It won't work because you won't get any patronage. So we're going, in 4 years, putting another 68 buses on. I would like to see the numbers that support that as well. Do we have some spreadsheets which capture the current patronage data by route, by hour, so we know what the usage is per vehicle?
Yeah, so through the chair, as Julie mentioned at the start of the meeting, we have commissioned the technical study from consultants, which is still being finalised. And within that, there are a lot of numbers that we would ourselves like to better understand. So, for example, the consultants are saying that the future cost of running diesel buses is going to increase substantially because of fuel prices. And generally speaking, zero emission buses are much cheaper to maintain because there are a lot fewer moving parts than you have with a diesel bus. So that's the CapEx, OpEx dilemma that we have. You know, if we retain diesel buses, the OpEx costs will become substantial, higher than they are even now. But the trade-off of that is an upfront capital cost to invest in the depot infrastructure and indeed the vehicles to offset that. And that's the discussion we're really having today, is what's the level of councillor appetite for one option versus another. You know, rest assured we have a lot of good data about where people travel to and from, how they use the bus, how many people use the bus. So all these factors will ultimately be fed into an ex-bus contract and future planning through the long-term plan, through the RLTP and indeed RPTP.
Can I respond to that, please? Yeah. My understanding is that energy, whether it's diesel, electric, whatever, moves in lockstep. Do we have graphs going back 20 years? Because I'm sure if you put those two into a graph, you'll find that they move pretty closely together. So I dispute the consultants' findings in that respect. And I know they're consultants. I'm not shooting the messenger. But I go back to the point that I made before. There's no way in the world I could make an informed decision on this without knowing what the impact is going to be on our patrons. They're the ones that pay the bills on this, ratepayers and patrons. And that to me is the most important aspect of this whole exercise. And I don't see the answer to that in this paper. I know you're seeking guidance, but without having that information, it's impossible to make informed decisions, for me anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Nebo.
You mentioned, and I think it was a China model you saw where the charging depot was providing charging services for other customers. First question is, does that have a material effect on the OpEx? And if it does, and I'm guessing it's probably a bit early to build that into because there's not enough electric rubbish trucks or whatever it is you can have in that town. But going forward, there would be a way of ensuring that our customers, i.e. our patrons and our ratepayers, benefited from that if it became available rather than the operator, if that makes sense.
Through the chair, exactly right. Whoever owns an asset, they need to try and make best use of that asset and get as many different users as possible paying for the upfront capital investment and the OpEx. So yes, if you can spread that cost over more users, whoever they are, then that's attractive.
Seems to me that we should try and build that opportunity into whatever the contracts look like. Yeah.
That makes sense. All right. We will keep moving. My understanding is that the next 5 slides or so will narrow us down and guide our conversation towards giving you direction.
Yeah, next slide, please. So you'll have seen this at the last workshop and in both of the discussion documents that we've provided. These are just the asset delivery scenarios, so they're familiar to you. Next slide, please. So out of all those options, we've hybridized some of them, and instead of 8 options, there are 5 generally that we need you to think about. But there are 3 broad asset delivery models. The first one is that where the operator provides all the assets. The second is where it's mixed. So there's a combination of WRC, the operator, perhaps territorial authority or some other private entity. So those responsibilities could be configured in a wide range of ways. And the third and final broad asset delivery model is where the Public Transport Authority provides everything. So for option 1, which is where the Public Transport Operator provides everything, this is essentially what we have apart from in Waipa, where we have Waipa District Council owning the land there for those depots. In all other cases, it's the land is either owned or leased by the bus contractor. And the main advantage of this option is that there are lower upfront costs for the PTA, which is us, and the costs are paid over the life of the contract. The main disadvantage is that under a ZEB scenario, this model could reduce competitive tendering in the next round of contracts because the incumbent would have a control over the asset, making it more difficult for a new operator to come in and access. So that can be changed by Phil's suggestion of transfer of assets to either the PTA or the next operator, whoever wins the contract.
So just a point of clarification, in the Waipa model, PTA is us.
Yes.
The PTO is not Waipa, or is it?
No,
no. Yeah. So what?
It's a bus operator.
Yeah. So where's Waipa sit in?
They are.
I'm just trying to make
in the sort of the hybrid in the middle, in that they had land or area that they could offer to us to lease.
Yeah.
So they own it. We provided the infrastructure, and there's contractual arrangements to make all of that work.
Yeah. But that would potentially be a potential scenario for HCC too.
Yes, yes. And in fact, we have spoken with HCC, and they've expressed, or the staff, and they've expressed a strong desire to be in on the conversation. They are looking around at their own land and some of those more optimal locations for depots to see if there's anything that could work for the city, that we can work together on to try and do a similar scenario to the Waipa one.
Cool. Yep. Next slide.
Okay, next slide, please, Brooke. This is option 2, where the PTA, which is us, would own or lease the land or control it in some way. And then the PTO, which is the operator, or a third party would provide the charging infrastructure and any of the other assets that are needed. So the main advantage of this approach is that the PTA, the Public Transport Authority, can plan the location to suit the desired bus network for the current and future, and it retains the ability to lease that onwards, at a later date in subsequent contracts. The main disadvantage, obviously, is the upfront cost to purchase land, especially in the metro area. Next slide, please. So this is just like a hybrid approach that you could mix and match, really. It's like a pick and mix. The PTA could control both the land and the energy, which is the depot and the charging infrastructure, including either both or energy to the site and to the vehicle. One of the main advantages of this is that it supports competitive and efficient market and long-term value for money. But the main disadvantage is the risk of technology obsolescence and needing to have staff that understand all of this. We're not really in a position to do that at the moment. and the ongoing expenses for maintenance, repairs and upgrades would also fall to the PTA. Next slide, please. This option and the next option were ones that as staff we decided not to pursue into the next sort of analysis. So I'll just briefly say that this one, there's no real strategic advantage in the PTA having control just over the charging infrastructure. That's worked in Waipa, but maybe in Hamilton it might not, because it's the depot location that's the sort of strategic asset that you need to control. So this option is, it could be potentially more complex administratively if we're only in charge of just the charging infrastructure. Next slide, please, Brooke. And option 5 is the one where the PTA, which is WRC, would own all the assets, which you can see by the graphs about the total costs is really, really large. That would include buses and everything. And for that reason, we've never owned buses. So for that reason, we've discounted that option as well.
Excellent.
Next
Did you
slide.
want, oh, you've
Yeah.
got more? Yep.
Yeah.
You carry on.
So we've had a lot of discussion as staff. This just outlines that we've discounted option 4 and 5 to move to the next stage. So the preferred approach is for one of the following: all assets delivered by the PTO, which is the operator. We control the land, or we control the land and the energy. So these are then assessed against transition timeline options in the next section of the workshop and the discussion document. So I guess our question is, next slide, please, Brooke. Oh,
In a minute.
sorry, if you've got
Oh, can we, yep, go to the next
okay.
one.
So which option gives us the optimum balance of advantages and disadvantages? That's your discussion.
Right. Thank you, Julie. I've got a speaking order. Councillor Ma, Councillor Nicol, and then Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, there's the ability to have a transition period and that sort of thing, but have we identified, are there operators in the market that can take on bigger chunks of ownership of various things? So, you know, we've seen a number of models up there now, but, you know, have we identified other operators in the market that could own all the buses, own the charging facilities, own, you know, compared to what they do now?
I'm not going to answer that because I don't know, but I think so.
Through the chair, yes. So generally speaking, public transport operators are highly geared up to own and operate both zero emission bus fleets and depot and any charging equipment. It's generally their preferred model. So what you find is that all the big operators, so whether it's Ritchie's or NZ Bus or Kinetic as they're now known, they'll have very established relationships with bus manufacturers. So when you ask for a tender, they'll come back with a very detailed specification about the kind of buses they think you need, and all of the other information, such as, you know, how the depots will operate. So they're pretty well geared up for it, and that's certainly their preferred approach. I think there's probably some uneasiness in the bus operator industry about others owning and operating assets. Let's put it that way.
No, thanks for that clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
Thanks. Yeah, that's helped a lot, and I would agree with where the staff have landed so far, especially for the initial phases of the transition. For the things just mentioned, I often struggle with the idea of a PTO owning everything, because I'm so mindful that these are all packaged with profits, which will go over to Australia generally. And I struggle with a public service paid for by taxpayers or ratepayers and users, which has to build that in. So my preference personally long term is that there'll be a nationalisation of this, so we can do things at cost rather than profit. But they do have the expertise, and as if there are the kind of organisations that are already tendering in the past, we think they can offer this. Like if they logistically can, I think option 1 should be on the table for sure. But I would like it to be mitigated with those clauses that things look at, because these contracts are quite long. It's nearly a decade. There's a lot that will happen in that decade in this transition. So if there were the right clauses, that would be, I'd be open to that. However, also really open to options 2 and 3 from the perspectives of partnering with our community on these things, because if there is a willing partner in either a TA or say Waikato Tainui for Hamilton, for example, why wouldn't we explore that further still? So I'm looking forward to seeing how we might narrow down from 1, 2, and 3 without more of that information, but at least we're getting one step closer for you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
So I'm presuming you actually aren't recommending anything. So from a user's point of view, they're only after 2 things, and one is a reliable, good price, and the other one is regular. You know, buses on time, buses every day, blah blah blah. They don't know what's happening behind the scenes to get to those 2 things. So when you look at the options that you may have or may not have recommended, where in those recommendations are the users are inputted into it, you know, where we are thinking about them as much as we are thinking about whether there be zero emissions and all of that. Because for me and the constituency people I use, which is way out in the rural areas most of the time, all they want to make sure is the buses are on time and the price is reliable. And I'm sure they pay the price to get them somewhere, as long as, you know, they can guarantee there's the same thing every day and they can get home. So in your options, where are we figuring that out?
So through the chair, there's a much wider piece going on here, which involves a series of bus network reviews that staff have undertaken over the last year or so, where we have asked those very questions about what the future bus networks could and should look like, and what matters most to both existing passengers who rely on that service, and also, very importantly, making it more attractive for more people to use the service in the future. Because the best way of reducing vehicle emissions is to get more people on a bus versus driving in a single occupancy private car. And that is always our focus, is what matters to the customer. So that's why, in parallel with all of this technical work we're doing on zero emission buses, we're doing these network reviews, and we're about to go out to communities now with some, in my view, very interesting and exciting options for what the services might look like in the future. So all the work's happening in parallel, and all those, you know, key decisions need to be thought of in the round, not just individually. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. We've got figures in front of us and costs and the likes. At the end of the day, I have initially thought that having land and energy controlled by council and leased to the operator was possibly the best result. But the reality is, I'm not sure that I've got the right information insofar as what's the sweet spot for bus operators to recover their investment. I'm told, if I think before, did you say 12 years for a battery, or 8 years, or 8 years for a battery? Is that the life of a bus? Well, we know that the infrastructure on the bus can go on for years and years and years, and then the ministry gets them, and then they become, well, in the old days, they were hippie buses and whatever. But so buses outlast the battery. So what is the optimal time for a length of contract? And I think that's what we need to be really cognizant of, is that the usual times may not be appropriate. And what is the length that they need to get their flesh out of it to their shareholders, but also to reinvest to get maintain the charges and all those sort of things. So I don't seem to see that package here, and to ask, 1, 2 or 3, just not so sure that we've got enough to build on at the moment, because it's easy to say one of those, but it's the contract with all the other elements of it that what's good for the council and therefore the region and the ratepayer, and what's good for the bus company. And there's got to be a sweet spot there somewhere. So the length of contract and what those are would really determine which one of those we should go for. So I'm really not so certain as to where we should be going. So can anyone comment as to what they think I'm talking about?
I certainly can. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the point. The sweet spot for an operator is as long a contract as possible, because if they are buying assets like depots and buses, they want the confidence they're going to use them and get paid for them for as many years as humanly possible. So currently standard contracts in New Zealand are 9 years. And there are potentially opportunities to discuss with NZTA about changing that, but that would have to be a conversation and agreement with NZTA because it's outside their current procurement manual rules. But essentially, it is about working out what is the best deal for both sides. The danger of having a very, very long contract with an operator is you're stuck with them. And if they perform well, that's great. If they don't perform well, then you've got a problem. So it's about trying to work out with NZTA in particular and with our operational staff who work with bus operators every day and know them far better than I do, about what would it actually take to get a really good deal from a bus contract. What would be that optimum time? Is it 9 years or is it possibly more than that? And you would argue it could be. So, we are looking at options about what the contract length could be, but we would have to agree with the NZTA. So we can't say for certain today, oh, great, we'll go for a 15-year contract and that will give us a much better deal. We're just not in that space at the moment, but we know what the options are and we are able to look at those options and try and work out with our colleagues, what they could look like.
I'm very mindful of the fact of these longer contracts because an example, at the district was an outsider came in and attended for the rubbish collection, won it because it was hundreds of thousands of dollars over the length of the contract, cheaper. But after about 4 or 5 years, halfway through the contract, they came and said, we're going bust. We need you to help us. And they said, well, we'll do the contract for cost for 5 years, and then we want another 10 years after that. The majority of the council bought into that. The reality is that company went bust and left the council on a mess in relation to rubbish. So, there's both sides of the coin there.
Maybe just a point there is one of the other work streams on that slide Julie showed right at the beginning is the Section 17A review, which is focused on service delivery. So one of the questions that will give us insight into is what is the sweet spot. So again, that will come through into the August and the September council meetings in addition to what we get to today. It would be nice to have it now, but we don't. So.
Councillor Kneeburn.
Thank you. So further to Warren's question, and I know probably Noel's too, the bit I'm struggling to get my head around is the process or mechanism. If the operator's owns all of the assets in the site and charging infrastructure, he's required to make that available to the potential future tenderers at the end of the contract. Does that process, and Phil, I think you said that's pretty common now, but I'm struggling to understand how that process could be completely unweighted towards the existing operator, or are you guys confident that the processes you use to do all that are all work the way they're designed to work? And
through the chair, we would certainly need to engage, good legal people to make sure that they bring their experience to bear in similar circumstances about how you deal with asset transfer. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, had a whole heap of experience of that in New Zealand because we've never had to do it because the zero emission bus contracts, they're all still pretty much in the first phase. And they're all generally operator led. So yes, we're confident that we've got enough good information from other jurisdictions and a good understanding of the process and good lawyers who can ultimately get us what is a fair deal in terms of what asset transfer would look like. The danger is that you get to the end of the contract and there's a huge bill for someone else to pick up, and at that point there's a big cost that ultimately regional council has to pick up. So we're very mindful that we all say, yes, asset transfer is a great idea, but it's only a great idea if the price is right at the end of the contract. And that's
Well,
what we're
yeah,
looking
and
at.
all the issues such as maintaining and
Yeah.
it's the end of life, all that sort of stuff. It just seems to me to be potentially fraught if you're not super.
You're absolutely
confident,
right. You hand back an asset, but if they've abused it for 9 years, then you're suddenly stuck with a real problem. So I've known contracts where there are, incentives around or even requirements around, regular maintenance, driving standards, all that kind of thing, so that you're confident you will actually get an asset that, to be frankly, hasn't been thrashed about for 9 years.
And you've got, it seems to me, you've got to have an enormous amount of transparency from the operator to make sure that they're maintaining it properly. They're not winding it down deliberately so that they, or over maintaining it deliberately so they can put in a cheaper tent. Well,
there's a lot to go through. I think you've worked out that's exactly right, that this is new territory for all of us. But the good news is there's lots of other examples of asset transfer that we can use. There's examples from the UK that I'm aware of. Someone mentioned PPPs earlier. I mean, that's another classic example where after a period of time, the asset is transferred back to the public sector, and there has to be very good KPIs and monitoring regimes in place to make sure that asset is fit for purpose when it is handed back.
And how many operators are there now that would fit this sort of model? And do you think that'll change will there be more going forward? Because to me, that has a bearing on us as well.
Yes, I think the challenge we have in New Zealand is the market has been consolidating. So there are now fewer operators and larger operators than there were a few years ago. So in the Gisborne tender that I was involved in recently, there was only one, which was the incumbent. Now, that's a small contract. We've got some small contracts here as well. So one of the things, again, we're looking at through the contract process, through the Section 17A review, is how can we make these contracts as attractive as possible to as many operators as possible. There are really only now 3 or 4 big ones in New Zealand.
And it seems to me that if they're going to own all of the assets, that's going to incentivize less operators rather than more. So
that's the danger you've got to guard against. So yes, hence why we're doing this piece of work, I guess.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, this is boiling down to needing all the information to make a decision on whether land is in or out on an ownership model or a lease or not at all, because that's the chunk of the capital cost. I mean, energy is a cost to get it there, and so does charging infrastructure, but I'd say they're dwarfed probably by the per hectare number. So if it was option one, let's say that we were to give you direction to say, just option one is the only one we're going to go with. We are then at the mercy of one of these public transport operators actually doing the work. Now, and they may, but we are at the mercy of them and all of their decisions of location and everything else. Just seems to me it makes sense to really explore 2 and 3 further, a lot further at this point in time, while being open to that if somebody comes along with a contract that you think looks better than anything else you've done, of course you can bring that to us at any point in time. I'm keen to understand whether you are modelling the value of land of any of these sites into the future, because even if we have that clause to transfer things, if the people who know lots about how much land costs in 9 years from the start of this, they might be able to advise whether that's a drastic increase in whatever all of the assumptions are they've got or not. So my understanding is land is the best investment in New Zealand based on all the settings that we've got. So that I'm quite open to councils owning land. Doesn't have to be this council, of course. But I'm mindful that, you know, we had assets in the past, like the port, and we sometimes lament why we did sell them. And so if we do have these things, we obviously have to use them well, whether that's financially an annual return as one often strives for, or whether that's long-term in the value of that land with or without the electricity coming to it. I mean, I would imagine that having a large chunk of land in 10 years' time with good electricity to it will be an amazing strategic asset for whoever owns it. Because electricity and land is where it's all at. So yeah, and that's one thought I'd come to is, will you explore the investment fund for this, just as an if it falls into that bucket? I suppose is one of the questions. And yeah, are you modelling this with land prices to help us understand whether we'd be better off taking the risk with the transfer or maybe just getting that capital gain ourselves, or a TA? Yeah.
So through the chair, we haven't asked the consultants to do detailed modelling on those aspects yet, because that would, I think, require direction from yourselves as councillors as to whether you think you want us to go down that route, because that's clearly quite a lot of work. What we have tried to do, I guess, is investigate what the land and the equipment will cost whoever is going to ultimately invest in it. And as you say, there are discussions around the value of that strategic asset in the future and how you value those. So all those things, yes, we would be looking to investigate if we've got direction from councillors to say, yes, we're interested in this approach and what the pros and the cons are, and clearly the financial ramifications, good and bad, for any decision around that.
I'm just signaling that those are the kind of questions I've got to get narrowed down further, just like others have mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. Just going back to the projections on the numbers of vehicles, can somebody explain how we end up with a 76% increase on the current fleet to the fleet projected to be in 2032? What's that based on? Is 10% increase per annum? And what is the cost of that as compared with status quo? In other words, carrying on the current levels of service that are currently being provided the users of the service.
Yes, so through the chair, we've asked the consultants to price various scenarios. So there are ambitions through, for example, PT Pathways to increase service frequencies in Hamilton, and we are looking at improving service frequencies in regional services, and of course all of those require more buses. But we're also mindful that at the moment there is no guarantee of any additional funding from either the government or indeed from regional council. So in the next contract, there will be a scenario which says, what can we afford within existing budgets, and therefore how far are we away from aspirations for improving services. So the reason we had those scenarios was not to say we want to do this, but we're saying if we did this, what are the costs and how do they compare to the status quo? And clearly there are significant increases in costs for more buses. There are also increases in benefits, and the question is, does the benefits outweigh the costs? That's the core of any business case. So at the moment, we're going through the numbers from the consultant to understand their take on the situation, and we'll certainly be able to advise when we've got the final report as to exactly what the balance is between those different scenarios.
So when are we likely to see the business case? Because I'll go back to my previous question. the people that should be making the decision on this are the users of the buses and the ratepayers. We're a very small sample. It's patronage on the buses which are effectively going to pay this. We have to get that up to 40% of user pays, which is what we've been required to do. So until we get a business case in front of us, I find it very difficult to make any cohesive comments on which of those options would be the preferred option, because obviously somebody's going to have to pay the bills, and that seems to be sadly lacking in this at the moment.
So again, this is one of the multiple streams of work that we're doing at the moment. This will come together for you through the August council meeting and the September council meeting, and our plan of how we present the various aspects of that to you through those two discussions is how cumulatively we'd look to see the decisions being made. So the aim today was to get some direction from you to ensure that we do what you are looking for at those two decision points.
Phil, with respect, there has to be, when you're putting a business case up, there's a significant difference between the base case and the nice to haves, which I assume are the top half. And until you see that, I just feel very uncomfortable trying to make any suggested parts of progress to help you come to the conclusion that this is the way we should be going.
Yeah, and those conversations have been coming together through workshops of the Future Proof PT subcommittee. We've been to see Hamilton City Council twice. We've been to see Waikato District Council, I think it was. We've been through the Regional Transport Committee last week, and from the end of this week, there's a few weeks of public engagement on this to get a sense from users as well as the wider public of the parameters of those options. And again, that will add more weight to what we bring back to you in August.
So what are you telling the user their projected costs are going to be in 2032 based on, say, scenario 3, where you've got an extra, another 76% increase on your numbers at the moment? What are the projected numbers?
So those are in those slides that went through the PT subcommittee. I don't know if anybody can recall those numbers, but there were scenarios for the regional routes of what could you get for roughly the current dollars, and this is what would be the extra cost would be of growing that to a medium scenario and then growing that to a long-term scenario. So those were part of the conversations we've had at those committees. PT Pathways as a 15-year future study was a project that we led through Future Proof, looking at the transition from an access-based network to a direct-based network, and how you would look to consolidate routes over time onto arterial corridors to increase frequency and provide a better service to the consumer. So that has been 12 months of work or so that's gone through all of those discussions.
It might be useful if we have that information shared as well, so we get an overview of what the projections are and feedback from the user, because it's all, it's the user at the end of the day is going to pay for this, ratepayers and pay for the story.
Yep, and we do know that those high frequency routes do get more patronage than the coverage routes as well. So that's why the direction of travel is that we go for more frequent routes.
So is it possible to get, what I'd like to see is a spreadsheet which gives me all the data by route, by week, by month, or whatever it is on the patronage. So we get a handle on just
and that all comes on the agendas to PT subcommittee and RTC as well, which are circulated to all councillors.
Okay, thank you.
If I just add, it's good that that stuff comes through that committee, but all those projections are always subject to the match funding from NZTA, which we just don't know what it's going to be. So they're a good guess, but again, if central government doesn't want to put much into the public transport section of the National Land Transport Fund, those numbers stay very small. If they choose to put lots in, we are ready through all of this work to do more, but it's just hard to be sure. That's all I wanted you to know.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I don't want projections. I want actuals. What are the actual numbers?
Yep, and that, like I said, the information comes to all of our committees.
We've got that for these 3 years. Yeah.
All right, Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to pick up on Chris's point, we currently have 109 buses. By 2032, we've got an extra 80 buses added to the fleet. And so the question is, I think he's asking is, how did we arrive at that number, and is that realistic, given that if we're having to spend, either us or the operator has to spend $110 million in 2028 for land and infrastructure for zero emission buses, that's going to push up the price of fares, presumably.
So through the chair, we asked the consultants to give us a scenario, which is if we were able to implement all of the service improvements that we would like to, and which are in the regional public transport plan, what sort of number of vehicles over and above what we've already got would you require? And when you're planning any future contract and future bus depot, having an idea of what your maximum should be is really quite important. The last thing you want to do is build a depot and it not being big enough for future expansion. So what you can do is secure enough land, build a depot, use part of that depot, maybe rent the other part out, depending on the situation, and build it up over time. So what we're saying here is that we're looking at a scenario of staged introduction, all depending on funding, all depending on national policy direction, and all depending, as people have said, on the appetite of both our ratepayers and indeed our passengers to support services and ultimately use them. So this is why we use the word scenario, because it's not something we say will definitely happen, but we need to plan for it in case it does happen.
I guess the point I think Chris was making is that if fares go up because of the costs of all the infrastructure and the new buses, you may get fewer people using the bus network and therefore a reduction in the number of buses required.
So through the chair, the greatest determinant of bus patronage is generally frequency. So people like frequency, and to some extent they're prepared to pay for it. So there have been fare increases in pretty much all public transport authorities over the last couple of years as a result of government policy. And so far, the evidence is that people understand the need to pay more. In a lot of cases, fares haven't increased by the rate of inflation for quite some time. So it's all very nuanced about what people are ultimately prepared to pay. And I guess the challenge we have is to find, use that phrase again, the sweet spot. What people are prepared to pay and what would tip them over the edge to say, actually, that's too much. I think our view is if we offer a better product, whether it's more frequent services and zero emission buses, people will be prepared to pay more than they do now.
And I guess what I would like to see for August or September is the zero case analysis of if we currently have 109 buses and this is the fare structure. If we move to increasing the bus network and building the infrastructure, what is the implications for the fare? So that we see if it's $1 for Route 1, does it still remain $1 for Route 1, or does it suddenly $2? It's just that's the bottom line about who pays for this, that we actually have to recover this money. But just moving on to the options here, you guys have got a very unique way of presenting documents in the sense that I've realised that right at the very bottom point, these options are assessed against the potential transition timeline in the next section. And right when we get to page 38, you've given us a preferred approach, which to me seems quite logical, because when you're looking at your option A, B, and C, full fleet, staged, or delay, and comparing it with option 1, 2, and 3, you almost automatically are ruling out option one, saying it's not possible to replace the buses by 2028. So option A, full fleet is gone completely. And when it comes to actually suggestions about whether the PTO should deliver the assets completely, you're actually saying, well, yes, that should happen for regional routes. Again, that seems logical. So I'm happy when we get to the preferred approach, but I just come back to the point that Chris was making, is that if the user has to pay 40% of the costs, what are those costs going to be? And bus fares.
Thank you. All right. Now we're going to move on to the next section in the time remaining. So Julie, if we could move through those slides and get to the next decision.
Thank you. So just to make clear, do you want us to come back with modelling on the costs and the impact on fares for each of those asset control options? Is that what you want?
Exponential increase from
Okay. So
And on that, does our LTP currently reflect the increase in the buses and therefore the rating impacts that we've just introduced with effect from the 1st of July? The biggest concern, of course, with ratepayers is once it's centralised, as we are planning to do from 1 July, that council then goes mad and puts new buses everywhere and ramps up the rating. So not being a cynic, because I'd never be one of those, what's the assurance that we're not going to get into that scenario by ramping up to 128? I think that was 15, was it, extra buses? Is that going to be cost neutral based on growth and all those other things? I know, 68 buses, yeah, well, it depends on which baseline.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. I believe that Vincent has something to add.
Yep, through your chair. So in terms of LTP, so we have budgeted sort of indicative increase to our current operating budget for to reflect the increased sort of service level from year 4 onward.
Magnitude of increase, because I think
So I think we
16
budget
million
additional 5 mil per annum to take into account of the increased service level from year 4 onwards.
So at the moment, I think we've got a budget of around 16 million, or was it 21 million, for the regional bus service. And then if it's 20 million, you'd add 5 million a year for 4 years. Or so that's
from year 4 onwards.
From year 4. So in 4 years' time, after 4 years to 8 years, you've doubled the size of the rating. Yeah, purely. Yeah, well, let's talk about if we're here next term on the annual plan, long-term plan on that one.
You will recall that this year we did dial things down because NZTA didn't come to the party as well. So
I appreciate that, but planning costs that we haven't discussed is worrying to me right now. Thank you.
Sure thing. Did you have anything else to add, Vincent?
Yep, I guess just for clarity. So I think at the moment, our annual operating budget for bus contracts is about $30 million a year. So I think from year 4 onward, we have budgeted additional 5 mil per annum. So that brings us to 35 mil to take into account of the contract renewal, because we foresee that we potentially, through the contract renewal, we might need to increase our service level. So there was additional budget from year 4 onwards, bring us to 35 per annum.
Cool. Thank you. Julie, if you take us through the next section.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess this whole exercise for the ZEB transition has been about trying to come to an in-principle position. We know we don't have the figures to give you. We know it requires a business case to go through the LTP. We're not looking for a decision today. It's more about which direction are we travelling in to transition to ZEB, because we've got the contracts coming up that we need to. So if you were to say, look, we just don't know enough, we're going to leave it to the operators, we're going to gather some more information over the next couple of years to make sure that the next round of contracts we're more prepared, it may be that we can do that. But then you wouldn't get your benefits of your ZEB, zero emissions buses, and you would find it more difficult to obtain secondhand diesel buses. So there are trade-offs the whole way, and it's just about, we just need an in principle position of where you want to head to, and acknowledging that we don't have the actual costs down to the minute detail right now. We know that it's going to need to go through the next LTP. So if you were to say, we want to have control over land, then we can come back to you with the more detailed business case to go through those processes.
So I'm just going to put a challenge out there and direct this very much at Phil, none of you. But we've known that this is coming for such a long time. And if we don't have the information in the timely manner to get the best possible outcome for the council, and if that's a resourcing issue, then that needs to be raised. I would hate for us to lose out on strategic advantage or the best outcome for the region because we are saying we don't have the knowledge. We're just going to see what an operator comes up with, but because we didn't plan for that. And I'm very mindful that Phil, you're still feel new enough in the role that you can say, you know, I'm doing the best that I can. Yes, but he's doing the best that he can with everything that came before him too. So that work could have started 5 years ago. Didn't have to start last year, for example. So I'm just putting it out there that if, based on what the councillors want to know and your judgment of when we need to know it, please come to us, because if we need to help you get there, I want to help you get there.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Look, right now I'm sitting here thinking to myself, best option we can do is that we know we've got to do it. It's mandated by government. There's no new buses, so we can carry on with the fleet that we've got. And we seem to be rushing to get to, because of the new contracts. We've extended them already once. Why can't we go back and say, look, we need more time to get our ducks in a row. We're offering you an extension of the existing contract for another 1 or 2 years. It buys us the time to get the information and the business plans and so on in place. And that would sort of line up with our LTP going forward. So it's, to me, we are not in a position, because if we make the wrong decision today, whether it's option A or B or C, and we find out that we've made a mistake, I'd rather be in a position to know that we have the time to put it right, and therefore offering an extension on those current contracts to me might seem to be a better option, even if it costs us slightly more in the short term. The longer term benefit to the region, to me, is the most important issue. So we don't have to rush anything because we've got the bus fleet in place. All we've got to do is put ourselves in a place when it's the best time to do what we need to do. So,
the chair, the challenge we have is really twofold. So firstly, we don't know whether NZTA are going to be able to support any further investment in the network, whether it's service frequencies or whether it's zero emission buses, because at the moment national government policy is very much focused on other modes. And so all PTAs across the country are in the same situation, where we're looking at the next regional land transport plan and national land transport program, and we don't have any certainty that we'll have any money beyond what we currently have in our continuous program. At the same time, we are being given a mandate to introduce and fund upfront costs for zero emission buses. And the two, my view, just don't add up. So what we're trying to do here is work out what the most sensible and affordable strategy would be. Added to that is that we've already agreed with NZTA to extend the contracts from when they were due to expire now until, in Hamilton's case, 2028, and the regional contracts later in 2027. There's no guarantee that NZTA would support another contract extension. And as I've found in other PTA areas I'm working in, even getting NZTA to agree to use older second-hand diesel buses is challenging because they don't often conform to the requirements for urban buses standards. So the problem we have is that the regulator NZTA and the funder NZTA are not necessarily going to agree to anything we put forward. So that's why we have to have different options to see what can actually be delivered in the time available.
Well, I'll just add to it that we intentionally sought an extension to a certain date in the future so that the work that we're doing now we're on track. We're programming, we're running out the program in the way that we have established it in order to get decisions to you in August and September with an NZTA board decision in December that will allow us to go out to the market in late January, early February. Landing those contracts around the middle of the year then gives operators a year and a bit or up to 2 years to establish, and that's the time frame that we need to protect, because if they have to buy land or install substations or buy 109 electric vehicles, they need the time to do that well, and that's why we're compressing the program now in order to ensure that we get good value through the market process that will follow in 2026.
About all the pieces on the puzzle, and that I accept, but the reality is it's not sufficiently advanced to give us a good basis to take the options forward. And in that situation, this is public money, this is people's income that we are going to tax through rates. I am not prepared to sit here as a governor and impose something with a big question mark and a hope that we get it right, unless you can promise me that we've got the ability to shift from whatever option to another option if it proves to be better in the interim, and that we don't put ourselves in a trajectory that we've got no other alternative. I am not confident in what I've been told today. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's not good enough. Sorry.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the three options up there. And again, I'm sorry, I need to come back to why is the date, you've just taken it off the slide that was just up.
Yep.
Thank you. Why is the date 2028 when the government instruction was 2035? So I'm just trying to, I suspect you previewed it in your last comment, but I just need clarity on why 2028.
So that's the start date of the largest of the contracts in the next round. So mid-2028 is the Hamilton contract launch.
Yeah.
So the question for the
government
market
instruction was 2035.
with the restriction that in 2 weeks' time there are no new diesel buses coming into New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah, I understand that limitation, but
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, because option B, obviously, staged approach, still potentially could meet the government deadline or not.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's what many other regions are doing, is they're introducing contracts that will transition over time.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you. Speaking at Noel's point, I'd quite like this workshop to recommend to council that council asks for an extension of our current buses so that we are not the leader in this process, because you've carefully explained there's no certainty, there's no money. We don't know what is the future looking like? So why would we be the first ones out of the block to say we're going to go for full fleet or staged introduction? If we can ask for an extension, and that would be the logical thing. When it comes to those three options, you pretty much rule out option A because it's just not possible to buy all the buses in that time frame. In reading through your options here, which leaves you with option B. And we've got the dilemma with option B is yes, it can be done, but there's high capital cost, 110 million in capex alone in 2028, and then again in 2032. So that's going to push a spike on rates and also bus prices. On the other hand, you're asking us to say we're not going to meet the mandate. We're actually going to give the thumbs up to the government and say, well, we're just not going to meet it. That's what that actually suggests. And then you're caught with fighting for a diminishing pool of old diesel buses from other councils.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, that's the challenge we have with option C in particular, is that we would ideally buy ourselves time by keeping the diesel buses going for a period of time, but they're getting older and older. NZTA may well not be willing to grant requirements for urban buses variations. The costs of servicing those buses will increase. The passengers are likely to find them less and less amenable and reliable. So what we're trying to do here, I guess, is work out what we're doing in a situation where A, we don't have perfect information, and B, we don't have sufficient confidence in the funding we know we would ideally need if we wanted to go for option A. Because if money were no object, then option A would actually be the best, not in terms of the short term, because there's a big cost spike, but in terms of what you save over the period of contract and the period of 30 years, A would actually be better value for money option compared to B or C. But if we don't have the money to do A, then B or C have to be the alternatives that we're looking at.
It's fine. And just for Phil, is it possible to ask for an extension?
I think the efforts that we had to go to secure the last extension, which was many months of work, and the reluctance at the organisation NZTA's level to continue to extend these contracts. I think, and I know other regions have asked for second and third extensions that have been declined. I don't think we could guarantee anything if we asked for a further extension. The other reflection is that under option A, Horizons, Palmerston North and Wanganui and Nelson both achieved a full fleet transition within a single contract round, where the depots were led by their operator as opposed to anybody else. Auckland, as I've mentioned already, is following that staged approach option. And most other regions have got contracts that will be going out, within 6 months or so of the timeframes that we're now working to for our contract. So nationally, the whole market's about to go out for a tendering round that will see one of these three options rolled out in every region over the next 3 or 4 years.
So could we get data from Horizons and Nelson about the impact on bus fares? Because that's clearly the issue sitting there, but who pays?
The private share conversation has occurred since, and the numbers that were quoted there are the original national targets. I've shared with you all the confirmed private share targets for our region, which are a lot lower than that. But we do now have an agreed number for private share that wasn't in place at the point that those contracts were let. So Horizons did review their whole fare structure ahead of these new routes coming in, and with the electric buses that they brought in, there was a big upscaling of their network from, again, similar to us, that access-based long, tiki touring around residential area type network to a much more frequent route network across arterial corridors with a 15-minute headway across the whole of Palmerston North City. So they totally changed their network at the point they brought this contract in, and
they got some of the government funding, I presume.
They got approval for funding. There was an issue around the continuation of that funding into this new National Land Transport Fund period, which you may have seen some headlines on 6 months or 9 months ago. But that funding is now secure for their 9-year contract term.
Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Look, I'm just going back to Noel's comments. I totally agree with him. And there probably is, an extension of the contracts. It's no skin off Kinetic's nose. It's not, it's to their benefit to extend the contracts. We've got a minister who's both in charge of local government and also climate change. I'm sure the approach to him would get whatever exemptions are needed to give the time for this job to be done properly. He's an amiable character, and he's not there to try and destroy the regional council. So I'd be very surprised if you didn't get a sympathetic ear to whatever was a sensible approach to. And to me, the staged approach is sensible. But delaying and doing it on a planned basis has some appeal to me. But I simply don't have the information to say that's the right way to go at the moment.
Councillor Nicol.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so that's why I raised my concern early on about the number of hypotheticals, and obviously this is a complicated topic, so it takes a bit for us to get our head around, but to try and give you principal direction, my thoughts at this point are option A, as James just said, is the best total value for money option. I don't see why, when we're governing for, the best long-term here, we wouldn't aim for it, option A. If it ends up being option B, that's just the realities of the uncertain environment we're in. That's fine. But I think we should aim for it. Others have done it around the country. Secondly, then, there are so many questions still on what the best strategic outcome could be that I think option 3 requires more analysis. And that's why I say to Phil, if you need people to do that analysis, please say. At any point in time, when we understand more about the option of controlling land, the option of controlling energy, we choose to go with less than that, such as only land, or such as the PTO does it all, then that's fine. So it's kind of, I'm staging it in that aim for getting us the best information to make a good strategic choice, which is A, option 3. And then if we end up moving up the table or across the table, even if we end up asking for an extension, which some people say they're quite open with, that's fine too. But it's such a dynamic environment, that would be where I would place my efforts in the initial phase, because we need real numbers, real possibilities, real locations before we can make any kind of actual decision down the track. And I'm just so mindful that you're going to come back to us over and over and over again in this process, where we can move from A3 up or across these boxes based on how much you can do before August. That's probably the best guess we're going to pop into that zero emission bus roadmap. Because if a PTO comes to you, like I said, at any point, and it trumps all that other research that you've done, then all good. Yeah, that's where I'm at. And this is obviously mainly for Hamilton. Yeah. The rest will, again, I would also still investigate those things for the other locations, but that's all resource independent. That's my best guess at giving you a principal direction.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. Councillor Chair Story.
Kia ora. So I suppose what we're trying to do here is narrow down the options that we do deeper dives on, right? That's the intent of this, because we can't get the level of detail that we're all asking for on every single one of these options. So if I go back to the structure where we had the options 1 through 5, we ruled out 4 and 5. We still had 1, 2, and 3 on there, but with option 1, that was with all assets owned by the PTO. That's at odds with the approach we have taken in Waipa, right? So we made a decision about the strategic advantage that that gave to the PTOs and said that's really not a place we'd like to be. So from my point of view, it's option 2 and 3 in terms of the structure that we want the deeper dive in. What I just heard before from you, Phil, is that if we now look at these options A, B, and C, in terms of you said that Horizons had done option A, but that was when when the PTO owned the land, right? So that's at odds with ruling out option 1 previously. So I suppose I kind of go, I think that there's a mismatch there. And so from my point of view, it's option B in terms of a staged approach, or option C, which I'd like additional information on, because there is a whole lot of ambiguity from central government in all of this. And so getting a bit greater clarity on that option gives us some runway to have other conversations with the government on whether or not this is a direction of travel that they're going to continue to support, thereby giving some validity to our longer term governance decisions. And I suppose in terms of asking for the extension, I heard both from you, James, and from you, Phil, that is going to be very, very difficult to do. So that's my view. We get a deeper dive in options 2 and 3, and in options B and C. That's what I'd like to see.
Okay. If there's nothing further, Julie, do you have everything that you need? Mindful that we haven't done the last few slides, but
Yeah. I think so. I think so. Have you got everything, James?
Yeah, through the chair, firstly, I'd like to say thanks everyone for your really candid views. It does actually help, because if we don't have honest views from people about what they would like to see or not like to see, it makes our job next to impossible. So really do appreciate that. Yes, look, in terms of a way forward, I think from my perspective, I've got enough confidence that we can use the work that's coming through from the consultants to look at these in the round and make some, not some decisions, but some judgments about where we think the best tactical option is likely to be. I mean, the stage approach is the one in particular that I think I wanted the consultants to show what it looks like, because it's something that is being done but hasn't been done previously in previous contracts where they've all been effectively transitioned at once. So I think at the moment we've got enough direction which says, yes, we know what we want to achieve and that we know what information we need, and we can now go away and discuss how we then take this forward into the next set of meetings. So from my perspective, yeah, it's really good to have everyone's views and we can move forward on that basis.
Gee, I just
something new to add? Or?
if you could read out the preferred approach, because I thought that was quite logical, so that everyone's got it. I've got it. Yeah, so there's three slides there that would be useful, just so that everyone's got them. I've got them printed out. It's easy.
So you mean the regional and then the Hamilton City?
The preferred option is, so they're suggesting for regional routes, the PTO delivers. Phil, do you want to talk to it? Sorry.
Yep. So the regional routes operator delivers assets for depots and charging infrastructure on commencements of new contracts in 2027.
So that means similar to Waipa, except Waipa offered the land to us through us, but you're essentially saying that for the the option is for the regional routes that the operator provides everything. Well, no, but that's the point that Pam was making earlier, that the preferred recommendation here is this. It's different than what Pam talked about. Okay, and then the next one,
Yep.
Hamilton City.
So that was the options that we've talked about. WRC to control the land for depots with charging infrastructure provided by a third party.
Because the charging infrastructure may be complex or difficult and someone else, the Well Networks is a specialist rather than us. So, yep. And I think there was a third one as well.
No, there's no more green.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So they did come to a recommendation.
Fully.
I just want to say this is effectively, it is a staged approach. If you were to get the PTO to do the regional routes at the commencement of the contracts, that takes the pressure off PTA trying to get ready in time for 2027. They're smaller contracts with a smaller number of buses. They don't need power upgrades. There's a whole lot of advantages in doing that in the regional routes. For Hamilton City, we thought that if you called it the staged approach, you could take until 2032 to get that ready. So you've done part of the fleet for the region through the regional routes, but the next phase is to do Hamilton City. That buys you time to go through the funding rounds and the LTP and the NLTP and all of that. So it's...
The land prices might have.
They may have,
So,
yeah.
I just
So,
wanted to know the information now, so we can
Yeah.
decide those things strategically.
Yes. So I think that, that's why we ended up with this sort of preferred approach, is that it does allow you the staged approach, but not necessarily in Hamilton City, but it buys you the time to do it as you would like to, properly planned for Hamilton City, but you've made an attempt to meet the mandate in NZTA's eyes because you've already allowed the operators to go ahead in the regional routes.
Okay. Stu.
Oh, just jumping back to the discussion we had about option A, B, and C. Just want to clarify, is option C really an option given the restrictions we're going to face with new diesel vehicles and that sort of thing?
Through the chair, it could be. So one possibility is that the council lets a shorter term contract for a period of, say, 3 or 5 years, and that would feature second-hand diesel buses. That would give council enough time to then pursue the ideal option at a point further into the future. So it's possible, but it would again need NZTA agreement because it's not a standard approach that they would use in their procurement manual. So it's all a process of discussion and negotiation. And, you know, to be clear, we wouldn't have put that option up if we didn't think it would offer some benefits in terms of buying us that time we would ideally like, and also to get the funding situation much clearer. Because coming back to that for me is the key challenge we have, the uncertainty around the funding, particularly from national government.
Yeah, I mean, like it or not, that's going to change with the flavour of the government, and you just don't know, eh?
You don't know.
And that, it's always going to be like that.
Yeah,
that's life, eh? But
life.
Yeah, look, I'm struggling a bit with C, but yeah, that's.
Just
Yeah,
very briefly,
Ben, yeah.
just wanted to know what's happened to community transport in this. Does this have to be electrified as well?
No, I believe that's a different discussion.
Well, I mean, you never know what the rules say, so.
No,
yeah.
because those vehicles are not, don't fall under the same requirements. Yeah, I think for me, the staged approach, and I'm really keen to understand where we're at with HCC supplying the land, also with TGH as well, and Well Networks. So I understand that Hamilton is probably the most complex landscape, such big contracts and such big numbers as well. So am I right in understanding that if we give a little nod to moving towards zero emissions in the wider region, that we can take our time within Hamilton City? Is that what you're saying, Julie?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, that's essentially it. It's the biggest, most complex contract. The land challenges and the energy challenges are the greatest, and that's the one that will take the time to get right, and we do need to get it right.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Okay. Okay. Do we need a sum up, or are we all finished?
Can we just check that Trudy and through you, Chair, that Trudy and Vince are happy with, we've got to?
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank
You, staff. I'll hand it over to Chair Pamela. If we're having a little break, perhaps, to start with.
Has anyone got any guide of what time we'll be finishing today? Just got